Hi, my name's Angela Casey and welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors, the podcast that explores Edinburgh's outdoor spaces and the people in them. I'm in Stockbridge today, which is an area of Edinburgh to the north of the city, just beyond the new town. And it's got little markets and boutique shops and the Water of Leith runs through it. And I'm here to meet podcast regular Hetty Lancaster of Hetty's History Walks to talk about the area, and we're going to spot some interesting things which are hidden in plain sight. So you're really just coming with us for a walk through Stockbridge. Discover its interesting history and the things that we'll spot on the way. So Hetty, welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors again.
God, thank you very much for having me back. Got amazing weather for today. I do remember it was very, very cold the very first time that we met.
It was.
So very nice to be doing it in the warmth. I'm literally slathered in factor 50 today.
You're slathered in factor 50 and you're wearing a map of Edinburgh, so if we get lost...
Yes, so you can just literally look at my top. So we're starting here at Kerr Street and we'll go into St Stephen's Place, come out, go across the bridge, do a little bit of the walk around the Water of Leith. Yep. We're going to have a look at this bridge. We're going to have a look at some gateposts, have a little look at a sundial. We'll finish up looking at another gateway.
Where we get a cup of coffee.
And then, so the John Hope Gateway is right opposite.
I was thinking about Stockbridge, and I know up the road here is a place called Circus Lane where we're not going, but that's one of the most popular Instagram spots, isn't it? And the locals get really cross about it.
So Circus Lane is a very picturesque cobbled mews, and very, very popular with the Instagrammers. It is a very nice walk through. It used to be my walk to work when I used to work here. I do sometimes take private tours through there if it's just a couple of us, more just because it's a nice shortcut without traffic. Although I did once get somebody who was big in real estate in the States, and she insisted on stopping and doing a little TikTok video, which I was slightly embarrassed about being British.
No. So looking at your top, we're in Jubilee Gardens, is that right?
This is the space where the Stockbridge Market happens every weekend. So this is a building called Duncan's Land, and it's a very traditional vernacular Scottish architecture building before we get the kind of typical tenements of the new town. This is well known for being the birthplace of David Roberts, famous painter from Edinburgh. But what we're looking at is, I've actually come to look at this lovely example of a door lintel, carved door lintel, and you can see it says, "Fear God Only, 1605, and then it's got a symbol which was probably a merchant's mark, and it's got some initials, and that would have been the initials of the couple who had got married. So I think you spoke about this with Ruth. I think Ruth mentioned this in her talk.
It was the one above the door at the Writers' Museum.
Yes. So you see them loads of places in Edinburgh, and it's partly because getting married was really important, because it was this big economic partnership between a husband and wife, particularly if you were a merchant. And I think in old Edinburgh, I think you couldn't be a burgess unless you were married, because it was such an important economic partnership that you had. And basically to be married made you extra respectable. But this is not original to this house. So this house is not from 1605. But when we come to the end of our walk today, we will discover possibly how this might have got here and who might have been responsible for it being here.
Mystery.
Yeah, a little mystery for today. So this house, definitely not built in 1605. This door lintel, not originally from here, but it is a very lovely door lintel.
It is an old house.
It is an old house. So it's from the late sort of 18th century. This is very typical 18th century architecture.
And there's a plaque about David Robertson here. He was a landscape painter.
Yeah, he does amazing paintings. He gets over to the Holy Land and through Europe. So you'll absolutely recognise his paintings if you saw them. And so at the back, this is quite a well photograph. You see this on Instagram a lot, because you can see we've got this nice sort of curved sort of external stair tower. So very good example of the kind of buildings that you would have got in the village of Stockbridge before you got the development of the new town architecture. And we're going to come down and look at...
This is St Stephen's Place we're at now. It's used often in filming.
Yes, I think it was used in North and South.
The house where they lived.
Yes, it was, wasn't it? They lived in that one there. And I guess because it's really easy to sort of demodern it.
They film here all the time because Melissa, who I know, she lives here, and she said often we're told we can't be in or out between certain hours because they're filming, and they have to be asked not to go and look out of windows and things like that. She's moved now, but she was living through the back here.
So we're in St Stephen's Place, and we're looking at the old gateway to the Stockbridge Market. And you can see it says butcher meat, fruits, fish and poultry. And it's a very nice neoclassical gateway. And the Stockbridge Market was around between 1825 and 1906. So that's the dates when it operated. And this would have been one of the entrance gates into it. So originally, people in the Old Town, they would have brought their fruit and vegetables up in the Old Town. And before the 1750s, Edinburgh markets were supplied from the surrounding areas, so places like Musselburgh, and women would have walked in carrying all the fruit and vegetables in on their and creels on the back, a bit like the fishwives. So creels were a very typical way that women would portage stuff around, and they would carry them through the streets, also on baskets on their heads, and they were known as the kale wives. So we think of kale as just this lovely green leafy vegetable, or maybe not lovely. Not everybody loves kale. I love kale, but some other people are like, well, why are you eating Brillo pads? Which I think is a bit unfair.
It can be a bit tough. Depends how you cook it.
But kale is absolutely synonymous with the Scottish diet, particularly in the 18th century especially. And actually it's so synonymous with the Scottish diet that the word itself comes to mean food or a meal. So people would say, you'll come for some kale. And they're just going to make you'll come for some food, or you'll come to eat. I mean, maybe in Morningside it'll be like you'll have had your kale. So the word kale was completely synonymous with food itself. And the 2 o'clock bells of St Giles, I love this. This really, I think, reimagined what people's lives were like. So different bells had different nicknames because they were associated with different things throughout the day. And the 2 o'clock bells of St Giles were known as the kale bells. Oh. And it was the food bells because that's when everyone had their main meal of the day. Because it's daylight, so your main meal was always in the middle of the day and not in the evening. So, but mostly now our main meal is in the evening, but it wouldn't have been then because you would have been relying on daylight. So the kale bell.
That's fantastic. I like that.
It's nice, isn't
really
it?
Like that.
Was it the 8 o'clock bells or is it the 6 o'clock bells? One of them was known as the Tinkle Sweetie, and that's because it meant that your work was finishing. Not that you wanted to go for a tinkle.
Oh, I was thinking it was good.
It meant that the end of the working day, and you could close up your shop and you could go to the pub, the Tinkle Sweet. So it's the sweet bell, the sweet sound of the end of your working day. And so then as the city grows, the city develops market gardens closer to the city and commercial growing begins. So you have people bringing stuff in carts, but also caddies. So caddies were employed long before this whole idea of golf caddies. And caddies is one of these words that actually comes out from French influence that starts during the Old Alliance. From what I understand, the word cadet comes from the military cadet, who is basically somebody who's doing all your fetching and carrying whilst they get their military training. They're your kind of military dog's body, your little cadets. And that's where the word caddy comes from. So It's just people who carry something for you. So you've got all these caddies carrying fruit and vegetables and stuff around as well. Initially, I have to say, the choice of vegetables pretty limited. So before 1750, really kale, cabbage, leeks, onions, and field peas. So not the sweet peas, field peas, this whole kind of peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, this kind of big stodgy peas pudding. And after 1750, roughly speaking, you get loads and loads of new vegetable varieties coming through. So things like the lovely sweet peas, radishes, potatoes, turnips, cauliflower, broccoli, that type of thing.
So potatoes were later?
Yeah, so they'd been here.
Yeah.
But people didn't really eat them. They were more a sort of animal food. Right. But they start to become popular on people's tables a bit later in the 18th century. Even things like artichokes and celery and asparagus and stuff is coming in towards the later 18th century. I mean, not on the tables of everybody, obviously, the tables of people who could afford. Some people would have had it earlier than that because they would have had these grand estates with hot houses and teams of gardeners. And so by 1771, you're getting market gardens all around Edinburgh, employing about 32 gardeners. By 1812, just before this market opens, you've got about 400 acres and 76 gardeners looking after them, and lots of land quite near here, actually. So places that we would very much think in the city centre now, or very close to the city centre, were market gardens. So the land either side of Leith Walk, for example, that was largely market gardens during the later 18th and early 19th century. So by the time this market opens in 1825, lots and lots of fruit has been grown around places like Haddington and Preston Pans and Dalkeith.
But all the things you're talking about, like celery and gooseberries and things like that, were they at a price that ordinary people would have been able to buy them, or were these at a price that it was servants buying them for the table of the rich?
I guess it sort of just changes. So probably at the beginning of the period that I'm talking about, it would have been the servants buying them for their masters, and then towards the end of the period, it's probably a lot more affordable for everybody. Although it's difficult to know. I think a lot of the kind of typical diet for ordinary people was pretty boring. Like, I don't think there was a huge amount of variation apart from in the seasonality of the vegetables.
I guess it's what you could afford.
Yeah, and mostly what you're affording is things like oats and sausages and the puddings, you know, the haggis, the black puddings, the white puddings, which used to be known as Jock and Jane. But I suspect by the time we're getting this market down here, I mean, I think stuff is just more affordable generally. So in the ground floor here, these were probably originally shops, I think.
Right.
Couldn't swear to it, but I think there would originally be shops, and then you'd have the stairwells going up to the accommodation above. They might even have been shops where people lived through the back.
So this lady Melissa I know, who was living here, she used to say that one of the things that all the Instagrammers do is photograph the washing. So the washing here is incredibly popular, and even more so if you were actually hanging it out at the time, and they all wanted a photograph of her hanging it out. And she reckons that her washing got photographed many times a day. She can find it on Instagram.
And do you think that's the ultimate sign of domesticity and slow living type idea, that you've got time to hang your washing out?
So we're now coming through from the St Stephen's Place, and it comes out onto Henderson Place.
Yeah. So this was the other entrance to the market.
It's quite a narrow road, so it's quite noisy.
Yeah, so we're going to cross the road.
So we've left Hamilton Place and we're now crossing this bridge, which has got a plaque on it.
Erected 1786, widened and improved in 1900.
So we're walking down onto the water of Leith Walkway, which takes us towards the Botanic Gardens and the Colonies with a lovely old sign.
Not that we're actually talking about anything along this route. This is just literally a nice way to get to the other bit of the bridge that we're going to mention. So we're standing on the Falshaw Bridge, which crosses the water of Leith, and it joins what would have been the sort of old village of Stockbridge, I guess, the high street of Stockbridge that we're familiar with the colonies, the Stockbridge colonies that were built by the Edinburgh Cooperative Building Company in the 1860s, which are fascinating in their own right, although we're not actually going to talk about the colonies today. But I thought what would be nice to talk about is some of these Edinburgh street names and this idea of Stockbridge. So I quite often say to people that we are incredibly unimaginative about our street names, and we call things like, it's the High Street because it's the main street, or we call things Candlemaker Road because it's where the candle makers were. But some things are a little bit trickier and they lead you into this false idea. So Stockbridge, we might think, is the bridge where the livestock got driven across, or perhaps the bridge next to the village stocks where you'd be put if you were bad and people would come and throw rotten cabbages at you or whatever. But that is not the case. It's actually a different thing, so nothing to do with either of those things. So Stockbridge in Old Scot, Stockbrig, actually meant a timber bridge, specifically a footbridge. And so actually, here in the 18th century, this was a ford, and there would have been a timber footbridge alongside, which is where they get the Stockbridge. And I do have a really lovely photograph as well, and we'll give people the link because this is on the Capital Collections.
Love it when the pictures come out.
And we are standing right here. So this building is that building right there. Yeah. And this is a postcard from 1874. And we can see that we've got a ford. And this is this wooden Stockbridge that people are walking across.
So that picture is extraordinary. So this was a wooden bridge. The road dropped down and across the water.
Yes, the road has been built up. It would have come along, it would have dropped down, and then it would have been quite a gentle kind of dip, because obviously it's for horses and carts. The thing that I find really interesting is that look how little water there is. And it's not very deep now, but the reason for that is because most of the water at the Water of Leith actually came off into the Mill Lade up at Dean Village, and so a lot of it got taken out of the Water of Leith to run down the Mill Lades, and so bypassed this particular bit. The Mill Lade started at Dean Village and then would come down through Silver Mills, Cannon Mills, and then it rejoins down at Powder Hall. And I think sometimes, I don't know whether you can see it on this side, I haven't actually checked on this particular bridge, but sometimes where you get the fords, you can actually see that some of the stonework.
There was somewhere I was looking here, if you stand here, you can see stones have been laid down there, can't you?
Yeah, so I think this is probably the old ford line.
That's the kind of thing I love, that you're just walking somewhere, you might be walking down here because you're going into Stockbridge or something, but that you can suddenly look over a bridge like that and see something really old. It's this thing I think I said in my intro, that I just love the things that are hidden in plain sight, as we say, that you can spot, that you walk past every day and you just don't notice.
I like the whole idea as well that people have been crossing this bit for hundreds of years just because it's a natural fording point. So when we stepped out onto the Falshore Bridge, we stepped out onto St Bernard's Row.
Okay.
So it's between St Bernard's Row and Glenogle Road.
Right.
St Bernard Row is one of the older rows. So it's before you start getting the slightly posher Newtown flats. But one of the things that I'm quite pleased about today is that it's sunny, so we're actually going to be able to see these a little bit clearer. So I want you to notice these gateposts.
Oh, yes, look at these.
Which have got a very old-fashioned lion. Quite often it's quite hard to see them if it's dark, but now that it's sunny, it's a little bit easier.
Funny-looking lines. The other one's hidden by the trees, sadly.
And these are one of these things. I've walked past here so many times and never noticed them. Just at the bottom of Arboretum Avenue.
But what are they?
So these are the gateposts that used to lead to the Inverleith Estate. So the Inverleith Estate was a huge estate that covers now mostly what is Inverleith Park and the Royal Botanic Gardens. Since 1665 it had been owned by the Roughhead family, which is spelt Rothschild but apparently pronounced Roughhead in one of those weird kind of ways. And this would have been one of the entranceways into the estate, and on old maps you can actually see that it's then lined with trees. And this building just here would have been the lodge house.
Oh, and that's the house that we could see next to the ford.
Yes.
From the other direction.
From the other direction.
Yeah. That's a very strange-looking lion, I'm sorry.
It is quite a strange-looking lion. So one of the reasons that they have quite strange-looking lions is that lots of people hadn't really seen a lion. So when you're carving it, you've got to sort of rely on maybe a heraldic device that you've seen, or maybe a picture in a book. But of course, even pictures in books were not necessarily from real lions. So sometimes people have described them and they're kind of like going, oh, well, it's like a cat, but, it's got this kind of tail or something. So sometimes these older animals do look a bit weird. He's got kind of a very worn head, so he's seen better days. I think his tail is actually curling round onto his kind of thigh on his knee or something. But yeah, just a really nice... And it's one of these things that you just pass them by all the time and you never really notice them. And then, you look up and you go, what is that weird thing on top? That's supposed to be a lion. The other thing that's a bit weird about lions, so we look at a lot of lions in old paintings and pictures and heraldry, and a lot of the time they're the old Gibraltar kind of European lion that used to be in Europe, not the big African lion. So now we only know about African lions because they're the only ones that are left.
There was a European lion.
I don't know whether it's called the European lion, but there used to be a smaller variation of the lion in the same way that you get Asiatic lions. So there's one place in India that still has native lions, but they're very, very rare now. So mostly we just have African lions left, but there were Eurasian lions. I don't know whether that's their technical name, but there were ones that lived in Europe and they were slightly smaller. So we could just follow this road up, this Arboretum Avenue, up to the Botanics, but we're actually just going to pop along this little alleyway called Plant Alley. So we're just at the back of Stockbridge Stockbridge now, just coming into Inverleith Park, past the boating pond. So we're just walking up with the boating pond on our left. We are going to go up to the sundial garden. So I think probably what we'll do is we'll go and have a look at the sundial, and then we might just go to a slightly quieter corner to do the chat, so we're not disturbing everybody's nice day. So we're sitting in a really lovely little part of Inverleith Park, and this is known as the Sundial Garden because in the centre we have a rather fabulous sundial. So it's made by a company, Edinburgh company called Robert Thompson & Sons, and they were monumental sculptors and carvers, and they made it for an exhibition which was the 1890 International Exhibition of Electricity, Engineering, General Inventions and Industry, which was held at Megatland in Edinburgh in 1890. So it was an incredibly popular exhibition. Almost 3 million visitors came to see it. And this was about 4 years after the big exhibition that happened on the Meadows. So I think more people are familiar with the big exhibition that happened on the Meadows. But there were some other ones around as well. And the vice chairman of that exhibition was a Baillie Kinloch Anderson. And he was a member of the Kinloch Anderson Company in Edinburgh. And after the exhibition finishes, he buys this sundial and then he gifts it to the Inverleith Park the same year, in 1890. It fell into disrepair over the years, and then 2018 marked 150 years since the founding of the Kinloch Anderson Company, and so the company actually came and they went and restored the sundial. They've replaced all the gnomons, and it's looking really fabulous now.
It looks like a station clock.
It does look like a station clock, and it's definitely that kind of Victorian era of public clocks, and putting things in public gardens for the benefit of the community is a very Victorian thing to do. So the Inverleith Park probably wasn't that old when this had happened. So the council bought the land from the Roughhead family actually in 1889. So this was one of the first things to go in the new Inverleith Park, was this sundial. And it's a very fancy sundial in the sense that it's got these 4 dials, these 4 faces, and they face the 4 points of the compass. And so each dial tells the time for a different part of the day. The south face of the dial is also inscribed with a little line, which is, "So passes life, alas, how swift," about the passing of time, which is a bit of a kind of modern variation on an old Scotch saying which you sometimes find on older sundials, which is, "Take 10 to time, ere time takes 10 to you." And it's kind of apt because Robert Thompson & Sons actually carved loads and loads of the headstones, particularly the really ornamental grand ones that you find in lots of the graveyards and burial grounds around Edinburgh today. This was the estate of the Roughhead family. You would get South Inverleith Mains was very close to here, literally just the other side of those trees, and it was the Mains farm. So a Mains farm usually refers to the home farm of the estate, and that is the farm that supplies food for Inverleith House, which James Roughhead has built in 1774, which is now that house that's right in the middle of the Botanic Gardens.
And we get back to our usual conversation about the fair botanists and Sarah Sheridan, don't you?
Exactly.
Which we always love talking about.
Well, it starts off with that brilliant bit of all the trees being moved from the Botanic Gardens when it was at the top of Leith Walk all the way to the new Botanic Gardens, because James Roughhead was an incredibly proud, unsufferable man by all accounts, really full of himself, but he was also an incredibly keen agriculturalist, and he actually gifts his land to the Botanic Gardens, and also the Horticultural Society also have land there as well. But one of the things that I really like, which is just opposite, so the Botanic Gardens entrance on Arboretum Road is the John Hope Gateway. Opposite the John Hope Gateway is the East Gate to Inverleith Park, and they have a really fabulous set of gateposts.
Oh, more gateposts.
More gateposts. And so we have this thing in Edinburgh which comes up quite a bit amongst historians and on tours, that Edinburgh has more statues of animals, named animals, than it does of women. But there are actually quite a lot of memorials to women around the place. They're just not statues. And these gateposts are one of those memorials. So we can see the names up on the gatepost. It's Alison Hay Dunlop, and she was a local woman who was born in Stockbridge in 1835. She had an injury as a child, which meant that she didn't really go out so much.
Oh.
And so she became incredibly well-read, enjoyed all aspects of history, both political history, social history. They weren't a particularly wealthy family, but she was well educated, so she spoke both French and German. She did English literature classes where she got a first prize.
Oh.
Her life was rolling on, as you might expect it to, but she was engaged to be married, and her fiancé died before they got married. And so she decided that she would remain single and realised that she would need to work for her living. And so she learnt about cabinet making and maker's marks and the antique industry. She learnt about house factoring, which is kind of house letting, and bookkeeping. And she used all of this to join her brother's house factoring, cabinet making and antique business.
Wow.
And she was an incredibly able and competent businesswoman in her own right, but she worked with her brothers for many, many years. Now, her interest in history meant that she became really fascinated with recording the Edinburgh of her childhood, the buildings, the stories, the legends, which were all disappearing because she was living through the age of the Victorian improvements. So this is the time when, you know, a lot of the old town was being knocked down, those sort of slum developments were being knocked down, and places like Cockburn Street and Victoria Street and Blackfriars Street were replacing the earlier closes and wines. And so with her brother, she used to go up to the old town at the weekend, and they would go and search amongst the old buildings that were being demolished, and they would look for fragments of architectural interest, so things like carved oak, stone lintels, pieces of marble, that type of thing. And they would also interview lots of the older residents for their memories. And she used to write all of this up, and she used to write these articles for the local paper. And I think that is maybe one of those ways that lintel that we looked at the very beginning of our walk today, that was dated 1605, we know that came from the old town. It wasn't from that building that we saw it in. And I do wonder whether it was Alison or maybe her brother who picked it up and saved it, and somehow it got to Stockbridge and became put into another building.
What a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice. And it's because there's not that many in Stockbridge, I don't think. No. But maybe there is, and I don't know. I mean, people who live here will probably know a little bit more if it's in sort of their gardens and stuff. So she lived in Edinburgh for most of her working life, but she'd always dreamt of travelling. And in the later years, her and her brother took loads of short trips to Europe, which they really enjoyed. And they both planned to travel to Asia and Africa as well. But unfortunately, she doesn't seem to have achieved that because she dies relatively young at the age of just 53.
Oh, dear.
In 1888. So she never gets to travel outside of Europe, which is a shame. But her papers were published as a collection by her brothers, and it was called Anent Old Edinburgh, or About Old Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. And these gate piers were erected in her memory, and they're a really rather fabulous bit of architectural history that links us back, and which most people, we just walk through and we don't even notice. I mean, I used to come and watch my son play football here a lot, and I don't think I ever noticed. And it wasn't until I was standing around really bored one day, and I went, who's Alison Hay Dunlop, and why haven't we heard about her?
That's really interesting. I mean, I've seen the gates. You can't miss them because they're so ornate opposite the botanics, aren't they? So, and they look very Victorian, don't they?
Yes, they are definitely very Victorian style. There is also a monument to her brother. So her brother is John Dunlop, and it's not nearly such a nice monument, if I'm honest. It's basically, there's a very rough granite obelisk which is in the intersection of the main paths in Inverleith Park, which is kind of like an old water fountain, which is dedicated to him. But I think it's quite ugly. Maybe when it was brand new, it looked really nice.
Or maybe it was just useful.
I quite like people like Alison, and it's not like she does anything groundbreaking or amazing, but actually her recollections do get into the other history books about Edinburgh. And I quite like to put her in, because although I don't do specifically women's history, I like to include them as much as possible in my tours, because I think we need to get women into mainstream history.
So what other tours have you been doing recently? You've been quite busy, I think.
So I've had quite a few private tours going on. I had some really lovely families recently, actually. So I've had families, sort of multi-generational families, I've had some from America, had some from Greece, had one from Norway the other day. And what was really nice about that was the kids were really interested. I'm not a big doing sort of children's tours. I don't really do that. But they were teenagers, young teenagers. And yeah, they were surprisingly interested in history. So that the Greek family, they actually lived in Athens. And we walked up from the Cannon Gate up to Colton Hill. And the young boy, he was like, that looks just like the Acropolis. And I was like, it's funny you should mention that.
That's so good. Well, at least now we know it does. That's
yeah,
good.
Exactly. That's what I kind of thought. I was like, it does actually look like the Acropolis, because I don't think I'd even mentioned that previously. And the young Norwegian, she had, in part of her class at school, they'd learnt the story about the little Victorian bagpiper boy who's sent in to go and walk along the tunnels under the castle, down under the Royal Mile, when the music stops and he's never seen again. And she'd learnt that in school.
Wow.
And I was just really surprised.
Yeah.
It was really nice. So I've been doing some private tours, and I've also been doing quite a few walks and talks for community groups as well.
We're just back at the lions. Here we are, erected by John Charles Dunlop. Listen, they've got big names.
These are much more impressive lions. These are Victorian, and the other ones we saw were in the 18th century. But here we can see, Alison Hay Dunlop.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Worth a visit. We're now going to go and have a cup of tea in the John Hope Gateway at the Royal Botanic Gardens. And I was going to ask you who John Hope was. Did he build the gateway?
He didn't build the gateway, no. So by the time the gateway is built, John Hope is long dead. So he is the 18th century Regius Keeper of the Botanics, and he's the King's botanist. I think he's a professor of botany at Edinburgh University as well. And so he was very, very important in the history of the botanics, because the botanics has moved around in Edinburgh. And at one point, early on in its life, it was essentially where the railway station is now, and it was bursting at the seams, basically. And he is the person who oversaw when it moved from there to Leith Walk, when it was at the top of Leith Walk. And then it's there for a bit, and then it moves up to here a bit later on.
Oh, well, he gets a big fancy gateway.
He does.
Where she just gets a couple of posts.
Well...
Thank you very much again, Hetty. I've really enjoyed that walk around Stockbridge.
Not at all. That's been really nice.
Yeah.
It's always nice just coming and exploring, and hopefully this will inspire people in Edinburgh to just look at some of the things that maybe they just walk past all the time without thinking about it. But also, whatever city you are in, there will be all these little things that are hidden in plain sight that will reconnect you to the history of the city and the lives of its past residents, and things that they would have noticed that now we're noticing as well.
Yeah, it's good. And it was nice today that we're just doing a walk. Last time we were a bit frenetic because we were chasing around trying to find signs on walls and city walls, and that was quite fun.
Yeah.
But this was very relaxing and lovely.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening to Edinburgh Outdoors. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate us on your podcast app and leave a review. And don't forget to tell your friends, family or colleagues about it too. And of course, if you know of an outdoors space or person in or around Edinburgh that might like to be featured, you can get in touch via email, Blue Sky, Instagram or Facebook.